Welcome back to the program. We're discussing the failure of Tehran and world powers to reach a comprehensive agreement on Iran's nuclear future. Joining us is Professor Mohammad Marandi from Tehran. He is the Dean of the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran. And here in the studio with me is Jamal Abdal, a Policy Director at the National Iranian American Council in Washington, D.C. Let's go back to Dr. Marandi. Dr. Marandi, we just heard a moment ago about this mutual distrust between the two sides, the blame game, as Mr. Abdi just put it. Is that at the root of the problem here, the fact that these two sides just do not trust each other?
Well, yes, that's true, but there's no moral equivalence, and contrary to what he says, the Americans have violated the agreement very extensively because the government itself, the Treasury, has expanded the sanctions regime, including many companies that over the past few months, more companies and many individuals, and that is an expansion of the sanctions regime. There's no doubt about that. On the other hand, there is no evidence that Iran has violated the agreement. Yes, the two sides do not trust each other, but the evidence is there for everyone to see. If in the United States the media and think tanks are basically towing the government line, you know, that's their problem, but the facts are there for those who want to see them. The United States, though, has to come to this recognition that it is the country that has imposed sanctions on Iran, sanctions that are illegal according to the WTO, and sanctions that are directed at ordinary Iranians. They have, for example, placed sanctions on the Iranian central bank that have prevented Iran from importing even medicine. And about a year and a half ago, because of this, we had a crisis of medicine and many people died. So we can't take this lightly. But in any case, if there is to be an agreement, ultimately what has to happen is that international law must rule. The Iranians, in the past, the Americans like to place the blame on Iran and say that it is the fault of the previous administration. The previous president was a threat to the world, according to the Americans, which was, of course, paradoxical because on the one hand, they said he was powerless. On the other hand, they were saying he was a threat to the world. But fine. Now we have a new administration with a new policy. The administration has been very flexible. Even the Americans admit this. But on the other hand, we do not see flexibility on the side of the Americans. But ultimately, I think this is going to hurt the Americans more than anyone else, because what they're doing is that by pushing Russia, by pushing Iran, and by pushing China, they're drawing these countries closer to each other. And we already see the results of that. So personally, I think that the United States is, in the long run, hurting itself through these policies more than they are actually hurting Iran, Russia, China, and other countries that it has some sort of conflict with. And so instead of trying to resolve the problem, they try to impose sanctions and try to punish their adversary, and it's not working.
Mr. Abdi, I want to move on to the role some of the other powers are playing at these talks, France in particular. The Guardian newspaper is reporting that France has consistently opposed concessions to Tehran in these talks. Why are the French taking such a hard line?
Well, you know, you'd have to talk to the French about why they're taking such a hard line. We, of course, know that the French played a key role in delaying the first interim agreement. They sort of parachuted in, Fabius parachuted in and delayed that. And, you know, we also know that there are a lot of stakeholders here. The French being one of the key sort of, you know, the ones towing a hard line. I think that the French, after the deal was extended this last time, they sounded like they were happy with that. That to me indicates that the French probably were not too happy with some of the potential compromises regarding centrifuge numbers that were being floated. And then, you know, we also know that you know, Benjamin Netanyahu was on the phone with Secretary Kerry. We know that the Saudi foreign minister was actually in Vienna. So those are stakeholders who are not a part of the process, but that are weighing in with the French, with the Americans, and I think probably not playing a very helpful role in enabling the type of flexibility that needs to occur in order to get this deal. But look, I think any way you slice it, it makes sense for the United States, for Iran to actually make these concessions. I don't care which party does it. The United States, the sanctions are not helping us in any way, and they're certainly not helping the Iranian people. For Iran, the argument that they need 10,000 or 8,000 centrifuges instead of 4,500 centrifuges, that's not a big enough concern to scuttle a deal. And so I think that these outside actors who don't want to see any flexibility, they're working with parties like the French and others to toe this very tough line that prevents these compromises that at the end of the day hold no real merit and only succeed in delaying what is going to be a good deal for everybody involved and for those parties who are actually interfering with the process.
Okay, Dr. Marandi, I want to look at the role of Russia and China in this as well, and I've just got a few seconds left. If you could be brief, please. They're also permanent members of the UN Security Council. Where do they stand on the nuclear program? We know that Russia has already agreed to build 8 nuclear reactors in Iran.
Well, ever since the events in Ukraine and the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia by the United States and the EU, that has caused the Russians to change their stance pretty significantly towards Iran. And at the same time, I think that's also true with China. The Chinese have also, since the sanctions on Russia, they've also been looking at the whole situation of sanctions very differently, both regarding Russia and Iran, because they see it as a threat to them. So in a sense, this has, drawn Iran and these countries closer to each other. But with regards to France, if I could add, and that is that the French are influenced by the Saudi money. The Saudis, the French economy, as we know, is not doing well at all, as is the whole of Europe. And the French need the weapon sales to that the Saudis are requesting, and the Saudis are making threats to the French government. So they are basically trying to appease the Saudis as they are appeasing others. But Saudi money has a very important role to play in Washington and in France.
That's where we have to leave it. Dr. Mohammad Marandi in Tehran, Jamal Abdal with me in Washington. Thanks to both of you for joining us.